Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Time Out with Derek and Joe. For Joe Azalina, I'm Derek Ano. Thank you, as always, for taking time out of your day to spend some time with us. And today we are shifting gears to a fantasy football talk episode, and we have a very special guest here, Joe Dolan, owner and managing editor of FantasyPoints.com and host of Sirius XM Fantasy Sports Radio. Joe, we appreciate you very much for coming on.
Hey, it's good to be with you guys. Obviously, I've got my Lehigh Valley roots. Joe and I have known each other for a long time. Joe A, some would call him back in the day. I was grandfathered in when we worked at the Crayola store together. I was original Joe. I didn't have to get my initial added to my name. So Joe is Joe A. In many
circles
to this day in the Easton circle, in the downtown circle, Joe, you are Joey. That's where it originated. No, it's good to be with you guys. Fantasy football, I know it's It's like fantasy football, really? You know, it's my full-time job though. So I'm focused on I just did a couple of drafts this weekend. I'm focused on fantasy football 24/7, way too much, honestly. I should probably take a day off here or there. But that's what's been going on. It's good to be with you guys. I've been a fan from afar, giving me a little bit of a taste of home. So I'm glad that you guys are having me on.
Yeah, I just want to, Joe, we go back a while, probably in the 2000s in some form, and then working
20 years, Joe.
20 years. That's a long time. I feel old, Derek. Derek makes me feel old because Derek's a little younger than me, but we make it work. But no, Joe, thanks again for, football's, like, hasn't always been my total strong suit, as my cousin Dan would point out. But we're gonna do our best today to, come to your level, if you will, with some fantasy talk today. So can always help people, and I'm looking forward to this show, definitely.
So without further ado, we'll get it started. And now, obviously, the draft was a couple weeks ago now. There were really 4 or 5 headliners in the first round, but as was mentioned on last week or 2 weeks ago episode with Joe's brother Mike, 8 starters in the first 3 rounds were drafted, which is the most in the modern era. So, Joe, let's start with obviously the number 1 pick here, Trevor Lawrence, going to Jacksonville, new coach, Urban Meyer coming on, and how do we see him fitting into the Jacksonville offense right away, and what sort of fantasy contributor do we expect from him?
Well, obviously, he's not. There's no guarantees the day 1 starter now. They just signed Tebow, or they're going to sign Tebow. That is obviously, I'm joking there. Tebow's converting to tight end, but Urban Meyer's bringing back the old crew. So what the way I'm going to talk right now, guys, is at FantasyPoints.com we do season-long projections with full stat projections, and we also do best ball staff rankings. And what best ball is, it's a really popular way to draft in the fantasy football circles. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with that, what best ball is, you draft a full team, but as soon as your draft is over, your team is done. You can't make any free agent moves. You can't make any waiver wire moves. You can't make any trades. You don't even set your lineup. Your lineup is set each and every week based on the highest scorers at a certain position. So, for instance, in most best ball formats, your team starts 2 running backs every week. The software will automatically take the 2 highest scoring running backs for that given week and put them in your lineup. And to me, that's the best way to draft right now, because I don't get good at fantasy football if I don't do fantasy football drafts. This is the best way to play. You can play for like $1, $3, $10. You can play for thousands of dollars if you want, or if you're nuts, or if you're just a high roller. Understood? I'm not judging here. So when I talk on my rankings today, I'm going to talk from a best ball standpoint and where I have guys ranked. And Trevor Lawrence right now, quarterback is very deep. But I have Trevor Lawrence currently at 131 overall. He's quarterback 14, which puts him right on the cusp of being a quarterback one, or what we would call, and when I reference a quarterback one, what I mean is a starter in a 12-team league. And so Trevor Lawrence is right on that cusp. He's obviously starting, barring injury, he's going to be a 17-game starter. Remember, the season is expanding this year. And he's going to run. That's a critical part of fantasy football quarterbacking these days. So many guys run now. It used to be back in the day, it was kind of a novelty. You would have your Michael Vick, but then you'd only have the guys who would occasionally scramble. Maybe Steve Young would run a little bit, but somebody like Brett Favre would scramble, but rushing wasn't a huge part of what he would do. Now it's a big part of what a lot of teams do, the design quarterback run game. Trevor Lawrence does give that element. Don't confuse him with Lamar Jackson, but he does give you that element. His receivers, they're iffy. DJ Chark is a pretty interesting guy. No doubt about that. I like him a lot this year. He's kind of a post-hype guy after he disappointed last year. Laviska Shenault's going to be interesting based on Urban Meyer's history with Percy Harvin, with Curtis Samuel, based on Darrell Bevell, who's the offensive coordinator, his history coaching Percy Harvin in both Minnesota and Seattle. So I think Laviska Shenault's going to be interesting. But Trevor Lawrence's weapons, they're not good enough for me to rank him above, say, Joe Burrow, who I have at quarterback 13, pending his recovery. I have Ryan Tannehill at quarterback 12. Matthew Stafford's up there as well. I think he's going to have a big year. But for right now, Trevor Lawrence is my highest ranked rookie quarterback at quarterback 14.
When do we see, how long do we think it's going to take for him to legitimately jump into that QB1 talk? Is it probably within a year or so? Or?
I would think within a year. I wouldn't be shocked if it happens this year. He's a very good prospect. Sorry, my dog's barking in the background. He's a very good prospect. Obviously, he's starting from day one. I want people to be careful with, we throw around the word generational. Sometimes it's true. Sometimes it's not. I don't think Trevor Lawrence is the same level of prospect that Andrew Luck was coming out, but he's a very good prospect. I wouldn't be shocked if at the end of the year, we're talking about him as like the 9th or 10th best quarterback in fantasy football. That's part of his range of outcomes. I'm just not sure his weaponry is good enough where I think that's the likeliest outcome. Ergo, I have him ranked at quarterback 14.
Now, obviously, Zach Wilson and Lawrence could have been a Jet had they decided not to, purposely win a game, yeah. But pretty unfortunate. But Zach Wilson, now also a Jet, taken second overall. I guess we could probably say he's in line to be another day one starter for the Jets. Maybe a little bit better receiving core, but again, not tops. Where do we see Zach Wilson ending up?
I'm actually worried I have Wilson ranked a little bit too low. I have him at quarterback 24 right now, which puts him on the back end of quarterback 2, which would be a backup quarterback in a 12-team league. I agree with you. I like the receiving core quite a bit. I like what they've done with the offensive line. I thought they paid a little bit too much for the trade up for Elijah Vera Tucker, especially since Christian Darrisaw was available with the pick they traded away to Minnesota. But you still have to take that into account that they improved the offensive line. They signed Corey Davis. They drafted Elijah Moore. Denzel Mims is in his second year. Chris Herndon, who's the tight end there, was a ghost for 15 weeks. And then at the end of the season, he exploded. They didn't draft a tight end, so now they have an interesting tight end. Their backfield added an interesting pass catcher in Michael Carter during the draft. We'll talk about him a little bit later. I'm a little worried I have Wilson just a little bit too low. But the reason I have him lower than, say, Justin Fields, obviously Lawrence, is because I don't think the designed run game is going to be as important with Zach Wilson. Not that he can't move. He can certainly move, but he's not going to be the threat with his legs that a Lawrence Fields or a Lance will be.
Now, obviously, he's talked about Lance. The San Francisco offense has, for quite a few years now, been particularly towards the run game. So Lance may give you a little bit of rushing and rushing touchdowns and whatnot. But the question there, I guess, is when is he going to be the starter with
Exactly.
Good old Jimmy G there, right?
If you were to tell me Trey Lance starts 17 games, well, then he's right up there with Trevor Lawrence. It's the same dilemma with Justin Fields, because there you have two guys, an Andy Dalton in Chicago and certainly Jimmy Garoppolo, who started the Super Bowl 2 years ago, by the way, who are more established starters than anything they've got in Jacksonville or with the New York Jets. So you have to build that into your rankings. Lance, I have at quarterback 28. If he starts 15 games, that's going to look stupidly low. If he starts 5 games, it's going to look stupidly high. So you're trying to balance that. You're trying to balance that. The fact that Jimmy Garoppolo is an established NFL starting quarterback, and say what you want, he's a decent one. He started the Super Bowl a couple years ago. Nobody's going to say he carried the 49ers there, but he started the game. So you're looking at it from a perspective as, how am I going to look the least stupid with this ranking? If I were to take a guess, I would say I'm too conservative on this one, just because top 3 quarterbacks. Do you know the last top 3 quarterback who started fewer than 5 games in his rookie season? Top 3 draft pick.
Oh boy, that's a tough one.
2007. Do you know who it was?
2007.
He no longer plays.
Go for it.
Question.
Jamarcus Russell.
Oh, from LSU.
Oh my God.
And remember, he held out in training camp. That doesn't really happen anymore because of the rookie pay scale. So he held out into the regular season, by the way. So you're looking at extraneous circumstances there. It's been a long time since the days of Carson Palmer. Remember, Carson Palmer was the number 1 overall pick in 2003 and didn't play that season because John Kitna was the starting quarterback of the Cincinnati Bengals. But the point here is that doesn't happen anymore. Jordan Love last year, all right, yeah, he sat the entire year. Keep in mind, he was a late first-round pick, and the guy in front of him won the NFL MVP. Jimmy Garoppolo is not winning the MVP this year. So Trey Lance is going to play. It's just a matter of when. And that's why I think this ranking of quarterback 28 is probably a little bit conservative. It's a little bit low, only because I think he is going to play sooner rather than later. I like the offense. I like the receivers. Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle. They've got a nice group around them. I like the system. The offensive line should be solid. Trey Lance is going to come in with a position to succeed. He's just very young. He only has 1 year of experience, and it was at a lower level of competition. You have to take all those things into account.
I just thought of a question.
Sure.
And the question is, if you look at, when you talk about, drafting your fantasy football team, everybody always says, and I've heard more or less, don't take a quarterback too early, right? You want to get a lot of skill positions. Yeah. Joe, would you say Trevor Lawrence, though, would be the guy to reach for a little bit, seeing that he's going to be a starter and he can put up some big numbers?
Of this group, yeah. And again, quarterback 14, I have him ranked way higher than a lot of the other guys. But I do want to push back just a little bit, Joe, against something you said. And for a long time, I was even still, I'm in large part a loyalist to the don't draft a quarterback early. The problem is the rushing production is pushing so many of these guys up draft boards, and you essentially get a cheat code. In the fantasy industry, a lot of people refer to the Konami code. You get a cheat code with these quarterbacks who run in addition to the fact that they throw. And when you start to get into that quarterback 11, 12 range, that's when you're going to start getting to the Matt Ryans and the Matthew Staffords and the Tom Brady's, who are obviously good players in good offenses, but they don't give you the rushing upside. The perfect example is Jalen Hurts with Philadelphia last year. I mean, they were at the end of the season. I mean, I would say he threw the ball well overall in one of his games. He was all right in the New Orleans game, but I would say he threw the ball well overall only in the Arizona game. And he made some other plays at the end of the season, but he was basically the number 1 fantasy quarterback over the final month of the season because he ran like a maniac. So, the problem is when you get a guy like a Matt Ryan, you can't he's not going to put up numbers in a game he doesn't play well, because his numbers are entirely based on his passing production. Somebody like Lawrence, although look, I don't think Lawrence is going to run as much as Lance or Justin Fields, but I don't think Lawrence is going to run as much as Jalen Hurts. But there is that level where he can put up 40, 50 rushing yards and give you extra points, maybe to offset an interception or two, maybe to offset the fact that he only completed 52% of his passes. He's the type of guy who can do that. And a rushing touchdown, I mean, that's just gravy if you get a rushing touchdown out of your quarterback.
Good
and
point.
the last guy we'll talk about here, as was slightly mentioned, was Justin Fields going to Chicago, the fourth QB off the board. 102 receiver or reception receiver there, and Allen Robinson, Penn State guy. David Montgomery, over 1,000 yards. Cole Kmet, decent tight end. But Andy Dalton there, of course, if you go back on the Twitterverse in Chicago Bears history, when they signed Andy Dalton,
Of course,
they had a nice little caption QB1 there, and then they go and draft Justin Fields. So you have to imagine at some point during the season, if not at a training camp, Justin Fields will be the starter. But what are our thoughts on Fields?
Well, I have Fields ranked at quarterback 22 in best ball. Again, if he starts 15 games, it's going to look stupid. If he starts 5, it's going to look stupid as well. It's just a matter of trying to balance that, put the bookends to it. I have Justin Fields ranked higher than Trey Lance, only because I view Jimmy Garoppolo as of a higher tier of quarterback than Andy Dalton. And I also view San Francisco, if Jimmy Garoppolo is out there playing pretty well and they're winning games, San Francisco doesn't need to go to Trey Lance. If they are sticking to a plan, Kyle Shanahan's safe. I mean, barring utter disaster. John Lynch is safe, the GM in San Francisco, barring utter disaster. Ryan Pace, the general manager, and Matt Nagy, the head coach of Chicago, they're not safe.
No.
And if Andy Dalton comes out and he goes 18 of 35 for 162 with a touchdown and 2 picks in week 1, they lose. Justin Fields is going to be the starting quarterback because they need to save their jobs. So Justin Fields is a better bet to start more games than Trey Lance is, in my opinion. You're right. Does have Allen Robinson, great receiver. Outside of Robinson, though, I think you can be a little bit skeptical of that receiving core. Darnell Mooney, the second-year receiver, is talented, but a little bit unproven. Kmet's a second-year tight end. Talented, a little bit unproven. I think you can look at Trey Lance's supporting cast in San Francisco. Even the Jets supporting cast for Zach Wilson is being just a little bit deeper and more well-rounded. The offensive line in Chicago is potentially a problem in ways that it isn't going to be for San Francisco and for the Jets. So you have to analyze it from a bunch of angles, but I'm ranking Justin Fields higher simply because I think he's a much better bet to start double-digit games than Trey Lance is. So I mean it's an inexact science at this point, but Justin Fields is much more important to the job status of his coach and his general manager than Trey Lance is. So I think he's a better bet to start more games. Though if I had to guess right now, I would say both of those guys end up starting more than half their team's games this year. It's just a matter of which guy do I feel better about starting more. That's Justin Fields. And there's another angle with Justin Fields, and you can certainly think the NFL is wrong on this, but everybody's like, oh my God, the Bears stole Justin Fields. He fell to number 11. I think if I have to be an honest analyst, I have to ask why. Why did Zach Wilson, who many would call a one-year wonder, why did Trey Lance, who many would call a one-year wonder, go ahead of Justin Fields in the draft? And your answer might be, well, the NFL's stupid. Okay, I mean, that's fair. And it's not like they're 100% right, but I still have to ask the question because Justin Fields had a couple bad games this year. Indiana stands out. Northwestern stands out. But then you see what he did against Clemson with like broken ribs, and you're like, okay, but he also had these great performances. He had a great statistical season. Why was the NFL lower on him than the Twitterati? And I'm not 100% certain of that. I talked to somebody, this is secondhand information, but I talked to somebody I trust very well in the NFL, and he told me that he spoke to a quarterbacks coach in the NFL who said he didn't think there was a meaningful difference between Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts as prospects.
Wow.
And now, what do you read into that? Do you read into that as this guy saying, hey, I thought Jalen Hurts was a first-round prospect, or I thought Justin Fields was a second-round prospect? So you have to take into account these opinions. Why would they say that? But ultimately, Justin Fields, when he gets out there, he provides that cheat code element. He provides the rushing, and it's going to make him a very popular fantasy pick this year. There's no doubt about it.
Out of Fields, Lawrence, and Lance, those three guys that can really run, who do you think rushes for more yards this season? Because they do the play action game, right? Lawrence will fake it to ETN or whoever's back will be. Is that tough to answer?
It's going to be Fields, only because I think his throwing talent isn't at Lawrence's level, but his rushing talent is higher than Lawrence's level. So I think Fields is the best bet to lead that group in rushing.
Makes sense.
Now, obviously, those are the top 4 quarterbacks who were taken in the draft, but there were others, as we mentioned, that were taken. Are there any others that we may eventually, probably obviously not to start the season, but maybe eventually take over, or for those who are in dynasty fantasy football leagues who maybe could draft in order to hope that they could take over down the line here, maybe a Kellen Mond drafted for the Vikings, or obviously Mac Jones in New England?
I wouldn't be shocked if Jones starts the entire year for the Patriots. Cam Newton was awful last year. And I think you can do I think you can do an autopsy of the Patriots season and realize his receivers were god-awful too. So that's certainly part of it. He might enter training camp as the starter, but make no mistake, this is a competition. And I think Mac Jones has a chance to win that competition. So I think Mac Jones has a chance to be a full season starter. So don't discount that. And you brought up the guy who, if you're in a dynasty, especially if you're in a 2-quarterback dynasty league, I'm literally doing a 2-quarterback super flex dynasty startup right now. Kellen Mond's the guy. Talented player, was a 3rd-round pick. I liked where Minnesota took him. I didn't think it was a reach of a pick, and it gives them a chance to develop a young athletic quarterback. 4-year starter in the SEC. There are comparisons to Dak Prescott, both physically and resume-wise, to be made as a long-term starter in the SEC. I don't think Mond ever played to Prescott's level. Prescott, was a Heisman contender in his last season there at Mississippi State, but there are comparisons to be made there. I'm not enamored at all with Kyle Trask or Davis Mills, who are the other high drafted quarterbacks. Trask, just looks like, you remember when the Broncos signed Peyton Manning in 2013 and they drafted Brock Osweiler in the 2nd round?
Oh boy.
This is kind of, I think, the Buccaneers Osweiler. Like he's a big galoot who has a decent arm, but he's not even going to be their backup quarterback this year because Blaine Gabbert's going to be. And Davis Mills, that Houston's a mess. Houston's one of those teams, quite frankly, I'm okay with ignoring them from a fantasy perspective this year. That team is a god awful mess right now. So I don't really have much interest in Davis Mills.
Would Ellinger or Book be? Ian Book. I'm being biased a little bit, but I know you don't take him in fantasy, but do they have any sort of a career ahead of them?
Ellinger has more physical skills than Book. I think Book stinks, quite frankly. He impressed me as a college quarterback, but he can't throw. And, that's kind of a problem. Now, maybe Sean Payton's sitting here thinking, well, I just won a lot of games with a 6-foot quarterback who can't throw the football in Drew Brees. But,
it's a reach.
Ian Book has an uphill climb.
I agree.
Neither one of those guys is much of a dynasty prospect to me.
Okay.
Let me jump off real quick there, though, Joe. I don't think we talk about that here. So let's talk about real quick New Orleans. It seems like Winston is the favorite to win the job. Obviously, Taysom Hill is there as well. In a perfect fantasy world, I think I know the answer based on your rushing category stats here, but in a perfect fantasy world, who do you want as the starting quarterback in New Orleans?
Trick question. Because if you're looking at the quarterback position, it's Taysom Hill. If I'm looking at everything else, it's Jameis Winston. Alvin Kamara's receiving production took a nosedive when Taysom Hill was the starting quarterback for the Saints last year, because he didn't check the ball down. He was taking off and running if his downfield reads weren't open. That crushed Alvin Kamara's receiving production. Now he and Michael Thomas got along all right, putting up numbers out there. That was good to see. But I mean, if I want this offense to operate like an offense where I feel like the ball can be distributed to Adam Troutman, the rising tight end, to Thomas, to Traquan Smith, whatever secondary receiver you like there, and certainly to Kamara, I want Jameis Winston to be the starting quarterback. And that's probably where I lean. I lean to Jameis, but I would not lay a single wager on that, because I think it's probably 55-45, and God knows what Sean Payton's thinking behind the scenes.
And 0 for poor Ian Book.
No, Ian Book. He was way overdrafted. 4th round. They completely blew that pick.
I was shocked. I was shocked.
A 4th. I thought he was like a 6th or 7th round guy.
I said the same thing. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I thought they totally blew that pick.
Moving into the running backs here, the first running back taken, Najee Harris out of Alabama, going to Pittsburgh. He is, according to Fantasy Points rankings, he is ranked number 15 overall. They talked about a bum ankle heading into the draft. Obviously, we know the horrible O-line there in Pittsburgh right now. They did draft Kendrick Green, a good guard, in the 3rd round, may get some time to start. But Najee Harris, do we see him as a number 1 running back to start as a rookie?
I have him as my number 9 running back overall, which, I mean, by definition, would rank him as a number 1 fantasy running back. And, after the draft, you'll always see people, I'll take Najee Harris in the 3rd round. Good luck. It's not going to happen. If you want Najee Harris, you're going to need to spend a 2nd round pick and maybe a 1st round pick. I'll fully admit this. I was a big Clyde Edwards-Helaire fan last year. Loved him in that offense. He didn't do as much for fantasy as I would think. I'm in on him again this year, by the way, because he's much cheaper. But when I look at, there were landmines for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I was drafting Edwards-Helaire in the 2nd round, even before Damian Williams opted out for the season. And then they bring in Le'Veon Bell. Then, they're giving Darrell Williams carries. They had all these landmines here that Clyde Edwards-Helaire had to navigate. And frankly, he didn't do a great job of that. He ended up getting hurt as well. I don't see that problem with Najee Harris. Everything is a commitment to Najee Harris right now. There is no threat of a landmine here. We know Mike Tomlin in his history has wanted to commit to 1 running back. They had 0 run game last year. And whether or not you believe it, that's what they're going to blame their lack of success on. That the reason they faded down the stretch was they put too much on Ben. He was getting beat up behind the line. They had no run game. So whether you think that's a stupid strategy or not, I have Steelers fans in my life who wanted them to take an offensive lineman with that pick and then maybe wait until the 2nd or 3rd round to take somebody like Trey Sermon as their starting running back, who ended up going to the 49ers, who's also interesting. But Najee Harris, I mean, just lock him in if he's healthy for 280 to 300 touches. I mean, this is a better bet than Clyde Edwards-Helaire last year. It's a better bet. I know the line stinks, but he can catch the ball. I think he's going to get the volume to offset the fact that he might, average 3.8 yards per carry, because I think he's going to get the volume. He can catch the ball. I truly think he's going to be a 3-down running back.
And also, it's obvious to say this, but for people that don't follow football, I just want to point this out. When you go to Alabama and have the success he did, it's just, I was happy for Pittsburgh to take him. He's the sure bet in my mind. And I think he's better than Connor was. I mean, maybe I'm wrong.
Much better than Connor.
Yeah. So, good job, Pittsburgh. Help that out a little bit.
It's great for fantasy. And if the discussion is out there, I mean, if you guys are in any way familiar with the analytics of football, it's a tired trope at this point, but running backs have depressed value, meaning the league has kind of realized that a running back, a really good one, while a good player and somebody's really going to help you, is a luxury, in that a decent running back has a better shot to succeed behind a good offensive line than a good running back has a chance to succeed behind a bad offensive line. So there is that the thought that maybe the Steelers put the wrong foot forward here. They went for the elite running back over improving what was a very bad offensive line, and I think it's a fair criticism. That being said, Najee Harris is not losing touches to Anthony McFarland or Benny Snell. It's not going to happen. Yeah, will they spell him every now and again? Sure, but there's not going to be a Nyheim Hines here to steal catches the way Hines did from Jonathan Taylor last year. There's not going to be a James Robinson who ran for 1,000 yards last year, having a role independent of Travis Etienne in Jacksonville. That does not exist in Pittsburgh. Again, like I said, if you can draft rookie running backs in fantasy. Anybody's like, oh, I'm not drafting the rookie. Just look, Jonathan Taylor won people leagues last year. Okay. Like you have to take good players when the situation presents itself. Najee Harris is a really good fantasy prospect based on everything I laid out. You do have to deal with the poor offensive line, but the fact of the matter is when it comes to Najee Harris is he's going to get 300 touches if he's healthy, and volume is king in fantasy football. There are very few. I would not be stunned if Najee Harris had more touches than any running back in fantasy football this year. Now, I think Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, Derrick Henry are better bets for that. But Najee Harris, combined with his carries and his receiving ability, I mean, he's as good a bet to go over 300 touches as those guys are.
I'm taking him, Joe. You got me convinced. I like him. I'm taking him.
Well, you better be willing to pay up for him if you want him for fantasy. But the reason is you're going to be paying up for him because it makes sense.
Right.
Now, obviously, a nice little segue here. It's like you're the host of a radio show or something. We go moving to Travis Etienne now, the second running back taken from Jacksonville or from Clemson to Jacksonville. James Robinson is there, and I'm sure keepers of James Robinson are going to be a little disappointed. Over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns last year. Etienne going to be the guy I think of, and maybe from the same school as well, I think of a CJ Spiller. Do we think he's a little bit better of a runner than CJ Spiller, or is that maybe what you're going to get from him?
Well, I really liked CJ Spiller as a prospect, so and it didn't exactly work out. He had a year or two where it did, but the ETN is more of an Alvin Kamara to me. I don't think he's as explosive as Kamara, but I think he's in that kind of department now. Here's the question: this is why Najee Harris is degrees of separation from ETN. They just had a running back in James Robinson run for 1,000 yards last year.
Yeah.
Urban Meyer, of course, had to sign Carlos Hyde because this is what Chip Kelly did. You have to get all of your old college players back in the fold when you come to the NFL. And Urban Meyer, now, not that I believe him, but he said ETN's going to be a third down back. Okay. I mean, I don't think even Urban Meyer and Trent Baalke, who's been in the league before, by the way, would spend a top 25 draft pick on a third down back, somebody who's only going to play on passing downs. But the fact of the matter is the competition is much higher for Travis Etienne than it is for Najee Harris. It's not even close. Now, I have ETN at 45 overall, RB22. That makes him a low-end RB2, but this is best ball. And when I'm talking best ball, I'm looking at the fact that by the end of the year, he might take over this backfield. I expect that it's going to be really frustrating at the beginning of the year as Urban Meyer tries to figure out how to coach in the NFL. As they're like, oh, we got to defer to the veterans, Robinson and Carlos Hyde, and Travis Etienne is getting, just minuscule work the way DeAndre Swift did early last season for Detroit. I think that is indeed a possibility here. So if you draft Travis Etienne, you might have to draft him as your second running back, but if you're in a league where you're setting your lineup for the first few weeks of the season, I would like to have a third running back who I feel better about early in the campaign as opposed to Travis Etienne, because I think this could be a messy situation. We don't know Urban Meyer's tendencies, by the way. That's a complete unknown. And while we know Darrell Bevell and what he's capable of doing, we know Darrell Bevell with the Lions last year deferred to a veteran in Adrian Peterson over giving the ball to the explosive rookie DeAndre Swift. These are worrying things for me.
Yeah.
Now,
That's fair.
when we come to the almost thunder and lightning that was at North Carolina these past few years, we see first Javonte Adams headed to Denver.
Williams.
What's that?
Javonte Williams. You're confusing with Devontae Adams. Believe me, I've done that a million times.
It's right here, Javonte Williams. I don't know why.
Yeah.
Melvin Gordon obviously is very up some weeks, very down other weeks. 7.3 yards a carry for Javonte Williams in this past season. Neither one, I think you could probably say, is a receiver. So is it safe to say that's going to be another frustrating running back duo for people going into the season?
I would push back and say that Melvin Gordon's actually a really good receiver. I think it's actually the most underrated part of his game. Problem is Melvin Gordon has ball security issues. He fumbles quite a bit.
Yeah.
And then you're looking at the specter that's hanging over Denver right now. Who's their quarterback going to be? And now, right now, my money would be on Teddy Bridgewater as we stand right now, only because there's a baseline level of competence that he offers that I'm not sure Drew Lock does. But, Denver is the team that's being buzzed about with Aaron Rodgers most of all. That's an unanswerable question right now. I think you build it into your rankings a little bit, or maybe your draft process when you're thinking about somebody like Jerry Jeudy or Cortland Sutton, maybe bumping those guys up a little bit in your personal draft board just on the chance that Aaron Rodgers is their quarterback. Now, to get to the backfield, I have Javonte Williams at 59 overall, RB25. This is, again, a projection that he is going to take over for Melvin Gordon at some junction. Now, Javonte Williams, from a fantasy perspective, I'm watching the NFL draft, and I want that instant gratification. I want like Najee Harris to Pittsburgh, where I know what that guy's going to do day one. I know he's the starter. I know he's getting the ball on the first play of the season. We didn't get that with ETN, nor did we get it with Javonte Williams. But if you take a step back and look at the forest through the trees a little bit, you realize this is probably a good overall landing spot. Melvin Gordon's on the last year of his contract. Denver, it could be in the position by like week 6 or 7 where Javonte Williams might be impossible to keep off the field. So there is that aspect as well. I look at it from Melvin Gordon, by the way, could face disciplinary issues for a DUI arrest. Charges were dropped, but it's possible he could be suspended for a game or two. If that's the case, does Javonte Williams start and impress right from week 1? So there is that equation as well. I really like the player. The landing spot I don't think is as bad as people might think, but it's still enough to have me rate him as like a late 5th, early 6th round pick and a number 3 running back overall, because I do expect if Melvin Gordon's out there week 1, that guy's going to be the starter until further notice.
Now, Joe, we talked briefly about the Jets and their position players to help out Zach Wilson. Obviously, Michael Carter is going to be one of those. A very good pass catcher, some power also in his game, good pass protector. That's easy to say that he's probably going to be at least a third down back. The other running backs there, I guess, is the problem. Tevin Coleman coming in from San Francisco. Okay. LaMichael Pirine there. I assume it's his job to lose eventually down the line here.
Yeah. Well, the problem with their backfield is they have bodies, but that's about it. LaMichael Pirine was a mediocre prospect, and I don't think he fits this new offense. Tevin Coleman's held together by masking tape. So, I mean, even if he's the starter to open the season, and that's kind of where I would lean, guys, I would say Tevin Coleman, just only because he's familiar with the offense. Mike LaFleur used to be with Kyle Shanahan with San Francisco. I would think Tevin Coleman is going to draw some interest there as the starter. They have Ty Johnson, who's intriguing because he came on at the end of last season, and he's got similar measurables to Tevin Coleman. So if their physical skill sets fit the same offense, you would think he's got a shot. But Carter is my favorite of these backs. And, I'm looking at our staff best ball rankings, and I'm thinking I got to bump him up a little bit here. I have him at RB 44. The next lowest on our staff has him at RB 38. So I guess on my initial run through, I'm lower on Michael Carter than the rest of our staff is. And I think a lot of people drafting him for best ball are drafting him with exactly what I've been talking about. The notion that midway through the season, he's going to be the guy who takes the job. But I'm not as bullish on him only because he was a 4th round pick. And though everybody's like, you can get running backs in these later rounds, the guys who have that premium draft capital like ETN and Harris and like Javonte Williams, those guys typically get the shot above guys who are day 3 picks. So Carter's an interesting guy. Certainly a guy, if his price doesn't rise too high, I'm going to have on a lot of teams just based on the upside. And this is a really good offense to run the ball in, as you guys know, because San Francisco runs the ball so well. And this is a good offensive line. They've done an amazing job building up that line over the last couple of years. I'm expecting the Jets to run the ball pretty well this year.
Carter also rushed for 3,403 yards, so he's going to get yards. It's just like you said, is he going to be able to break in the lineup at times? So
yeah, and he can catch the ball too. And so our guy Scott Barrett at fantasypoints.com has done research for fantasy. If you're in a PPR league, Joe, you know that, points per reception.
I do.
If you're in a PPR league, a target, not a catch, just a target, is worth 2.5 times more for a running back than a carry is for fantasy. So you want your running backs, unless they're a complete freak in nature and they're getting 25 carries a game like Derrick Henry, and that's an outlier, you want your running back to be able to catch that football. That's far more important than getting carries.
The screen pass is very important.
Well, and the screen's very important, but also just like running, the ability to run routes out of the backfield, like the angle route, the Texas route, to be able to split out wide, which certainly somebody like an Alvin Kamara can do, like Christian McCaffrey can do. Occasionally you'll even see Dalvin Cook do that. That's very important as well. And I think Michael Carter has those skills.
Cool. Wow.
Now, Joe, looking at some sleeper options that you maybe could find at the end of your draft, rookies, of course. We talked about maybe Trey Sermon out in San Francisco. I know Joe's brother Mike would say Kenneth Gainwell out of
Gainwell's a really good receiver.
He likes him, Joe.
I know you and we're going to be talking about Miles Sanders later, so I don't know where you think he fits in with Sanders, maybe.
Yeah, the thing with Gainwell is he's a really good receiver. Our guy Greg Cosell, who did our draft guide at fantasypoints.com, called him the best receiving running back in this class. And
wow,
see, again, you get to the point where Gainwell could see 50 carries this year, like Nyheim Hines, and be useful for fantasy. Trey Sermon is the one who's the most fascinating to me, because you want to talk about bodies in a backfield. San Francisco's got like 20 running backs on their roster. Jeff Wilson was a league winner for people last year. He won me $850 in an NFFC league. Thank you, Jeff Wilson. Bought me an entertainment center because I drafted him in like the 33rd round. And, at that point, you're just looking for guys who had who their name. Oh, yeah, Jeff Wilson. And it was they have Raheem Mostert. They signed Wayne Gallman. That not only did they draft Trey Sermon in the 3rd round, they drafted Elijah Mitchell out of Louisiana in the 6th round. So they've got like 5 guys contending. They have Juszczyk, the fullback there, who gets targets out of the backfield.
He's a beast.
But you look at that and say, if Trey Sermon is the number 1 back in San Francisco, that's RB1 kind of potential there. So like Trey Sermon's going to be a really interesting guy, even if it looks like, the drain's clogged a little bit here. Like he's got a little bit of work to do if he's going to get into the lineup. So he's interesting. Kenneth Gainwell, the problem with Philadelphia now is Philadelphia just signed Kerryon Johnson off of waivers. Now Johnson, after a promising rookie season, has really fallen by the wayside. But the thing about him is he can catch the ball and he can pass protect. So what's the relationship with Kerryon Johnson, if he makes a team, going to be with Sanders and Gainwell? But Gainwell is interesting there. I think Elijah Mitchell, also with San Francisco, is kind of interesting there because I like a lot of the things that he is able to do. It was not a very good running back draft, though, guys, and there wasn't a ton of guys draft. Kene Nwangwu, I'm definitely saying his name wrong, out of Iowa State, who went to Minnesota in the 4th round. Super explosive, super athletic. The problem is Dalvin Cook and Alexander Mattison are there. So you've got so much competition for touches there that the running back class doesn't have as many late dart throws as it's had in the past.
I got a guy I've had my eye on since last year, and that's Oklahoma State's Chuba Hubbard. Do we think he could be anything or just kind of average?
He would probably be a pretty darn good handcuff for McCaffrey,
I would say
right?
he's the handcuff for McCaffrey, but the problem with Hubbard is he had a great 2019 and an awful 2020. And how do you reconcile that?
Right.
Is 2019 the right guy, or is 2020? He's the handcuff. They lost Mike Davis in free agency, who, by the way, ended up being one of the biggest winners of the NFL draft.
Yeah.
But I would think right now Chuba Hubbard's the best bet to be the backup to Christian McCaffrey, which is valuable in and of itself, as you saw last year with McCaffrey missing most of the season.
Moving on up to the receivers here, you could say it was a pretty strong receiver draft, at least in the first round. Jamar Chase taken with Cincinnati, which I guess you could find to be very interesting. They have another team that has a bad offensive line. They have T. Higgins, who was very good last year. Tyler Boyd is a very good possession receiver. But Jamar Chase, physical, can get up and jump to get the catch. Our wide receiver 26, I believe you have him right now. Do we see where do we see Chase in the potential moving forward?
Yeah, our staff has Jamar Chase at wide receiver 26. I have him as personally my wide receiver 24, and I'm just going to make an apples to apples comparison here. AJ Green, who was running around last year like he just got pulled out of a sarcophagus. I mean, looked like a mummy out there. Had 104 targets last season. He had only 47 receptions. I mean, on a per target basis, he was the worst receiver in football last year. Just say Jamar Chase gets those 104 targets. I think he can do some serious damage with those targets. 60 to 65 catches, 900 to 1,000 yards, seven to 10 touchdowns. I mean, I think that's within the range of outcomes. And I love what T. Higgins did last year. Jamar Chase is a better prospect. I mean, the problem is now you have three really good receivers. You have Joe Mixon coming out of the backfield. And maybe they didn't address the elephant in the room, which is the offensive line after their quarterback got folded in half on national television last season. So you reconcile all of that. But the fact of the matter is AJ Green had 104 targets last year. A rookie receiver can do a lot of damage, especially one with Chase's pedigree on 104 targets.
Also, Joe, I said on our show last time, I love to say this again too. The connection between Burrow and Chase can't be understated. Can't be understated. I'm going to continue to say that during the year. Chase is on my mind for the draft.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's going to be a high-end wide receiver 3 on draft day. You're going to have to pay up to get him. 5th or 6th round, I think. But I would take him first of Cincinnati's receivers. And that is high praise because both Higgins and Boyd were very good for fantasy last year.
They had good years. They both had good years. Yeah. And T. Higgins coming out of Clemson, again, he got thrown to by Lawrence. I mean, sometimes it's a crapshoot to where these guys are going to fall.
Mean, it's just really Cincinnati's got a chance to be a really fun offense if Burrow is healthy. Of course, that's the big question. If.
Right. Yeah, if.
And now the second of 3 reconnections here. Jalen Hurts now to Devonta Smith, who is headed to Philadelphia. Obviously, pretty underwhelming in terms of receiver. Travis Fulgham was the number 1, I guess you could say, last year. Jalen Reagor drafted pretty high, did not really pan out. Zach Ertz probably going to find himself traded or something. You would think Dallas Goedert is the guy there now. Is it safe to say Devonta Smith is jumping into a number 1 role there, which is very valuable for a number 1 receiver?
One of the things I think the Eagles made a conscientious effort to do this offseason is change the culture a little bit. And, maybe there was a lack of accountability in that building. I don't care to rehash the Carson Wentz conversation, but you can make excuses for Wentz's play last year, but I don't think you can defend it. You can make excuses for why he didn't play well, but I don't think you can defend his play. And it seemed like Wentz had a problem with that. And one of the things with Reagor, and by the way, I'm not writing off Jalen Reagor just yet. He was young, had no full off season in a broken offense with a quarterback who forgot how to play. So let's pump the brakes on that right now. But one thing that this team just absolutely lacked at the wide receiver position, and it's probably lacked since Alshon Jeffrey's first year with the team, and then, hell, even going back, you might say lacked since Terrell Owens, is having an alpha dog. I'm going to show you my teeth. I'm going to go get the football, and I'm going to be a prick about it. And there's nothing you can do. And Devontae Smith is undersized. I get that. I have my playing weight in high school was 175 pounds. Okay. I haven't weighed that in a while. Devontae Smith's 166, but, and I mean, it is a big but. It is a big but. But you ask somebody outside of that, what issues did you have on tape with Devontae Smith? And people are going to struggle to come up with any. And does the size play in? Yes. A 200-pound corner can out physical him, but Devontae Smith can shake it. The guy's he's a playmaker, and he's an alpha personality. Jalen Reagor did not have an alpha personality last year. JJ Arcega-Whiteside, I don't know if you can get deep and up into the alphabet to talk about what kind of personality he has. Like they just needed to reestablish. Devontae Smith's the number one receiver in Philadelphia. Now, does that mean Jalen Hurts is going to look to him more than he looks to Dallas Goedert, who I also really like for fantasy? I'm not sure about that. You expect Philly's going to be a run-heavy offense. Comes with the territory with Jalen Hurts at quarterback. Think that's fair as well. But I mean, Devontae Smith, I have him ranked behind Chase, but he is easily my number 2 rookie receiver in this class based on the projected target volume in Philadelphia. And like you guys, I anticipate that Zach Ertz is going to get traded.
He made defensive backs at a high level in college from Alabama again. He made them look silly, and it's going to be fun to watch him in the NFL. I also like what Joe said about, like, remember, he's the Heisman Trophy winner. He can put that up top on his list. But they say a humble kid. So, he's going to have every
I'm just
chance.
talking on field, and I thought the same way about Jamar Chase.
Right.
Devontae Smith played like an asshole. And like, I mean that in the greatest context of the word. When I talk about all time, like the asshole Hall of Fame, I'm putting Steve Smith up there.
Oh yeah.
And I think you could see elements of that playing personality in both Jamar Chase and Devontae Smith.
Where'd you have him, Joe? I think I missed it. Where'd you have Smith?
Devontae Smith in my fantasy ranking?
Yeah. I
have him 68 overall, wide receiver 33.
Okay.
So that would make him a late 6th, early 7th round pick.
Gotcha.
But he's by far my number 2 rookie wide receiver in this class.
This next guy is interesting. I've been waiting for this because I have people that are Miami fans. So, this is going to be an interesting one.
Well,
obviously Jalen Waddle going to Miami. I said in our draft show, I find it to be a very interesting fit because really how different is he than Will Fuller and Devontae Parker?
Nelson Aguilar.
Where does he fit in there?
Aguilar's in New England, Joe. So
I'm sorry.
Aguilar's in New England. I know
he's a different team all the time.
I've got I would like to see. I would like to get some truth serum or maybe a couple daddy sodas into Chris Greer, the general manager of the Dolphins, and truly get what he wanted to do with that pick. Because I'm going to take a wild guess and say he expected Kyle Pitts or Jamar Chase to be available at that pick.
I thought the same thing.
Because, I mean, now Eagles fans have had a legitimate gripe with Howie Roseman and his drafts the last couple of years. No doubt about that. They've had a legitimate gripe. But Eagles fans freaked out when they traded down from this pick because you're like, how can we pass on Kyle Pitts? How can we pass on Jamar Chase? And I think Chris Greer, the general manager of the Dolphins, had that exact thought. These guys, this Roseman, I'm going to fleece him and I'm going to get a generational prospect. And what I really expect Greer thought was, I wonder if he bought into the fact that San Francisco wanted Mac Jones. And he's like, okay, San Francisco wants Mac Jones. I know Carolina loves Trey Lance. So Carolina's going to leap us, whether it's with Atlanta or whether it's with Cincinnati, and they're going to get Trey Lance, and Cincinnati's going to trade back, and Cincinnati's going to take Sewell because they need an offensive lineman. Or hell, Cincinnati could take Sewell anyway because they're sitting at 5 and they need an offensive lineman. I'm going to get Pitts or Chase, and I'm going to come away with a big-time product. I do not think, my heart of hearts, they will never tell you this, but I don't believe Chris Grier gave up an extra first-round pick to trade up for Jalen Waddle. I do not think that's the case. That doesn't mean Jalen Waddle isn't a good prospect, but from a fantasy perspective, Tua was not impressive last year. And now they're giving him every opportunity to be the starter this year. But I mean, I'm finding it hard to shake the fact that this guy was not the best quarterback on his own team last year, and in a playoff hunt got benched twice in game for Ryan Fitzpatrick. So I'm still skeptical of Tua. And the target distribution here is going to be gnarly. I mean, Devontae Parker's your X. He's going to be the guy on the perimeter. You're going to move Will Fuller and Waddle. Now, I think Waddle, by the way, Fuller has a 1-game suspension to start the year for his PEDs. So Waddle is probably going to start the year at the Z. But you have Gesicki at tight end. They drafted a tight end in the 3rd round out of Boston College, Hunter Long. So, they have Fuller. Lynn Bowden was there at the end of last year getting targets as the slot receiver. I just wonder if Waddle is going to be a splash player in the element of Henry Ruggs was for Vegas last year, and just doesn't do a whole lot for fantasy. So that's my concern with Waddle. Very good prospect, but I just don't think the situation is nearly as pristine as it is for Chase and for especially Devontae Smith.
Joe, how many touchdowns do you think he catches?
5 or 6.
That's what I was going to say. Under eight though.
I mean, yeah, I just could see him, Joe, having a 45 catch 700-yard season with 5 touchdowns, and he's the Dolphins are completely happy with what he gave them, like from a football standpoint. They use him on jet sweeps too. Everybody's gonna say, oh, I'm looking for the next Tyreek Hill. Hopefully on field you're looking for the next Tyreek Hill. And Jalen Waddle has that kind of skill. But I just, if you're looking for outliers, like for instance, I don't think he's coming in and catching 85 passes as a rookie. Talented though he may be. I don't think Miami traded up with the intention. I think they were like, all right, worst case scenario, we'll take Waddle, but I don't think they made this trade with the intention of selecting Jalen Waddle. I don't think that's why they made this deal. So it's just kind of an odd pick from that regard. No,
Chase and Pitts they had to be on their lines.
Yeah, I just don't think they thought only 3 quarterbacks would go in the top 3, and I don't think they thought Cincinnati would pass on Sewell. That was my read on the situation.
And the 4th wide receiver taken there was Rashad Bateman, who went to Baltimore. I guess you could liken their offense to San Francisco. Going to be a lot of running here, not a ton of receivers that really jump out at you.
I mean, oh God.
Hollywood Brown had 769 and 8 touchdowns last year.
He had a bad year.
The highest receiver. Mark Andrews has been getting decent run at tight end. Sammy Watkins is there. Where does Bateman fit in? Do we think he can take that number 1 role, or is he just going to kind of get stuck in that mishmash of receivers that they have?
Here's the problem. I really like the player, and I just absolutely abhor the landing spot. I think it's a terrible landing spot for fantasy. And again, I'm talking from a fantasy perspective. I don't have any problems with Baltimore saying we need another wide receiver. But from my perspective, my selfish perspective, I want to score fantasy points. And Rashad Bateman, somewhere like Detroit, would have been a lot better for fantasy than him going to Baltimore, where they're the lowest volume passing offense in the entire NFL. He can lead this team in targets and get 100, and that's not going to be great for fantasy. They're always going to be a run first team with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. That Lamar Jackson is not going to turn into Peyton Manning overnight. It's not going to happen. That doesn't mean he doesn't have an incredibly dynamic skill set, but you're not going to square peg round hole this. Just because you drafted Tylan Wallace and Rashad Bateman doesn't mean he's going to be dropping back 45 times a game. That would be a complete misuse of his skill set. But for fantasy, it's terrible because he's competing for targets with Mark Andrews, who, in my opinion, is their number 1 receiver. He's competing for targets with Andrews. Hollywood Brown had a terrible year last year, but he can fly. And then there's the Sammy Watkins factor. I call Sammy Watkins the worst good player in the NFL. Like he just shows up at random. He's super gifted. He shows up at random times. He was a hero in the Super Bowl, but I don't think Kansas City could have moved on from him quick enough, So I would think Watkins probably starts the year as the X receiver. and Bateman might have to start the year as the slot receiver, which has him, pretty far down in my wide receiver rankings. I have Bateman as a first round pick. I'm at wide receiver 79. And just to compare you where that is, that's behind Brian Edwards. It's behind Christian Kirk, who's a big loser of the NFL draft. That's behind Randall Cobb. It's right ahead. Joe. I know you're a big Kendrick Bourne fan. It's right ahead of him. So
I'll give you the Michael Bourne.
No, that's where I have Rashad Bateman. Again, I probably can move him up a little bit, but it's just a nasty situation. Just a bad landing spot for him. Also complicated by the fact that they added another talented receiver in Tylan Wallace on the third day. So just a problem in terms of how many mouths there are to feed with very, very few passes to be thrown.
Out of these three receivers that are absolutely could be important to their teams, but in fantasy circles, Joe, Kadarius Toney, Giants, Terrace Marshall Jr., or Sage Surratt. Do you see any of those guys?
Well, Sage Surratt worked out at his pro day, Joe. He was about as athletic as you are. So he went undrafted. So I'm not he's the guy who of these guys, I actually have Kadarius Toney ranked the highest at wide receiver 74. I don't like that fit. It was a weird fit. He's kind of a gadgety player. One name I'm going to throw out there, first and foremost, Elijah Moore with the Jets, I think is going to start in the slot from day one. They might trade or cut Jamison Crowder. If they do, attach a rocket ship to his butt because he's going to rise up draft boards. He's a super talented player. The guy who I'm looking at who might have a shot to get a ton of targets as a rookie is Amon-Ra St. Brown. He was a 4th round pick, which I thought he was going to go in the 2nd round, and he was a 4th round pick. Our guy Greg Cosell at Fantasy Points compared him to Robert Woods. Oh well, who's throwing the football to Amon-Ra St. Brown in Detroit this year?
Right.
Jared Goff. That offensive line is actually pretty good. They can protect him. They have nothing on the perimeter. Tyrell Williams, and Brashad Perryman are always hurt. Their number one returning receiver is Quintez Cephas from Wisconsin. Their number one receiver, quite frankly, is TJ Hawkinson, the tight end. That's who their number one receiver is. But I wouldn't like Amon-Ra St. Brown for a 4th round wide receiver actually has a shot to lead the Lions wide receivers and targets. And I would never say that about a 4th. Just goes to show you how thin they are at receiver. But I thought the Lions got good value with Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Derek, you know who his brother is? He's former Packers receiver and Notre Dame standout St. Brown.
Equinemius.
Yes, Equinemius. Yes. Amari Rogers, is he another guy that we should watch out for? Clemson
yes.
guy.
Yes.
Depends.
But it depends on
who
if
the
other
quarterback
A. Rodgers is there.
Oh, that's right.
Now, because I like this guy. I think there's legitimate comparison to be made that he could be used in the way Randall Cobb was used with Green Bay. But they've got to patch up things with Aaron Rodgers. Guys, I'm pleading the 5th on so many things with the Packers right now. It's a rough time to be in our industry, quite frankly, because the Packers have 2 guys who by ADP are 1st round picks for fantasy, Devontae Adams and Aaron Jones. And I don't know if Aaron Rodgers is going to be there. And that's a huge problem there for when it comes to that.
Yeah, definitely.
So as we jump here finally to tight ends, luckily it's a short list here. Kyle Pitts, obviously for Atlanta, Joe, obviously Julio Jones is on the downslide of his career, 777, 71 yards, 3 touchdowns. Calvin Ridley is now officially the number 1, 90 catches, 9 touchdowns, almost 1,400 yards. Obviously, and I think I have it written down for later, but obviously this will hurt Hayden Hurts stock, who had a pretty decent over 500 yards for Atlanta.
Yeah,
but Kyle Pitts is kind of a different animal, that's for sure.
Basically everybody who has any sort of panache in the draft Twitter sphere on whether on television called Kyle Pitts best tight end prospect of all time. And I think the guy who would be most comparable, maybe Kellen Winslow. And I would say from an athletic standpoint, since Vernon Davis put together a borderline Hall of Fame career. So
freak athlete. Jesus.
They're freaks. Rookie tight ends, it's an adage in fantasy. They're always the position that produces the latest. Like, and think about it. Like, you can make the argument it's the hardest position to learn outside of quarterback, because what do you need to know if you're a tight end in the league? You got to know both the run scheme and the receiving scheme, because you got to block in the run game and then you got to catch passes. I don't think Atlanta is going to be like, well, Kyle, you were the 4th pick in the draft, but we can't put you on the field until you learn how to chip block. You don't take the guy 4th in the draft and then bench him because he can't block. And by the way, he made an improvement in college at that. Kyle Pitts, I don't care. He might not line up as a traditional tight end all season. It doesn't matter. I have Kyle Pitts as my tight end 7, which, I mean, it's stupid for a rookie tight end. I mean, rookie tight ends do not produce, guys. They don't. But Kyle Pitts is coming in here as the highest tight end drafted ever. I have him at 7. I think you can make an argument. You can rank him higher than Dallas Goedert, who I have at 6. I have a tough time ranking him past Hawkinson at tight end 5, only because I think Hawkinson's the number 1 receiver there. But I mean, this guy is a freak. And if you want him, you're paying a 6th or 7th round pick. You're not getting him any cheaper than that. You have to pay up for Kyle Pitts. You're not going to sneak him onto your roster.
And Joe, is there literally any other receiver or any other tight end, from this year's rookie draft that you find to be potentially fantasy relevant heading into 2021?
Only really Pat Freiermuth. In the event Eric Ebron gets the case of the dropsies or gets hurt, you could talk me into Tommy Tremble, who is the Notre Dame tight end who got drafted by Carolina. Now, Carolina signed an interesting guy by the name of Dan Arnold this offseason, who's always been a good athlete and has never had really a full-time role. He's projected to be the starter, but Tremble does something that's going to get him on the field immediately. I hate to keep bringing up Greg Cosell, but he's one of the most respected football analysts on the planet. And he said in his evaluation of Tommy Tremble for our fantasy points draft guide, he said he looks to melt the face mask of whoever he's blocking, which means, I mean, we just talked about Kyle Pitts. Now, you're not going to keep Kyle Pitts off the field because if he's not a good blocker.
Tremble's going on
but
the field.
If Tommy Tremble is a good blocker, he's going to get on the field. And then blocker. Targets can come from that. He was underutilized as a receiver at Notre Dame, but he's got big time skill at that position. So he's certainly somebody. I wouldn't be shocked if he contributes at some point this year.
I like that.
And Trey McKitty, who was drafted by the Chargers in the 3rd round, is interesting. I think it's an uphill climb for him to contribute, but Tommy Tremble's the guy I'd be looking at on the lower end.
No, Yeboah or Long. Would you say one of those guys?
What's that?
Hunter Long or Kenny Yeboah?
Hunter Long. He went to Miami in the 3rd round. Right now, he's I would say semi-buried. Yeah. Kenny Yeboah didn't get drafted. So I'm not really sure what was up with there. I think everybody expected him to get drafted. Yeah. John Bates, Mr. Bates, who went to the Washington football team. He could be somebody who's interesting. And then one more just to throw it out there, although Irv Smith is the tight end in Miami and in Minnesota rather, and I rank him as a top 10 tight end this year. The Minnesota drafted Zach Davidson from the noted bastion of power, Central Missouri. He was their punter in college. So he's a combination tight end punter, and he's a really good athlete. So just somebody to keep an eye on there.
Oh, man, Davidson.
So, Joe, let's shift gears here, and you are actually going to give us your top 5 in terms of QB, running back, wide receiver, tight end. Just give us your top 5 list and a couple of facts about each of them you want to throw out.
Okay. Well, right now, this is going to sound blasphemous, but only right now, I have Dalvin Cook as my number 1 running back. I just feel good about that offense. Christian McCaffrey is a very close number 2. If you take McCaffrey number 1, I don't give a crap. That's fine. Alvin Kamara is number 3. I would feel worse about him if Taysom Hill's a starter in New Orleans. We already discussed that. I have Saquon Barkley at number 4, coming off the injury. I think Gettleman's kind of a dunce, but You would hope that things are going to improve there for that offense. And Derrick Henry's my number 5. Again, people like, how do you have Derrick Henry at 5? He doesn't catch the football.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, like you keep betting on these outlier performances. The guy is a freak in nature, but you just have to keep that in mind. I currently have Davante Adams as my number 1 wide receiver. That is extremely tenuous at obviously with Aaron Rodgers. But Davante Adams did put up numbers a couple years ago with the god-awful Brett Hundley at quarterback. So that just goes to show you how good Davante Adams is. Tyreek Hill's my number 2 wide receiver. Yeah.
Just real quick, I was just going to throw out there, if say Jordan Love comes in to be the new quarterback for the Packers, how far do we think that drops Davante Adams down?
He might want to leave.
I don't think he falls past the 2nd round, just because I think people are going to trust him. And you would think that Jordan Love's going to gravitate towards him, but I mean, it's a fair enough question. I think it would bump Tyreek Hill up to the consensus wide receiver 1. My number 3 wide receiver, by the way, is Stephon Diggs of Buffalo. I have AJ Brown of there's very little competition for targets for AJ Brown. He's my number 4. And my number 5 is DK Metcalf of Seattle. And
2 of them.
All those are up for debate right now. But you know, it's pretty tight there at quarterback. My number 1 is you guys are going to be stunned by this. It's Patrick Mahomes of the Chiefs.
The Chiefs, Derek.
Number two is Josh Allen, Buffalo, who had a phenomenal year last year. Lamar Jackson is number 3. I was out on Lamar Jackson last year. He was too expensive. He is no longer too expensive. I will be drafting him for fantasy this year. My number 4 quarterback, Kyler Murray, who needs to improve. He had very similar rookie and sophomore campaigns where he was more of a splash player than anything else, but the rushing production is ridiculous. I have Dak Prescott at quarterback 5. And the reason being, he's coming off of pretty serious injury. So they're loaded on offense, but he's coming off a pretty serious injury. So, you know, you have to take that into account when it comes to Prescott. Now, tight end, again, not going to surprise anybody here. My number 1 tight end is Travis Kelce. He's my 7th overall player. I moved him above Davante Adams in my overall rankings, just based on the uncertainty with Davante Adams. Way down the list, I have George Kittle as my tight end 2 at 29 overall. I have Darren Waller from Vegas at number 3, 33 overall. So he and Kittle are very close. I'm still struggling with Mark Andrews, who's my 4th tight end. I'm just a little bit concerned about his volume, and I have him way below like those other 2, Kittle and Waller. I have his 3rd round picks. I have Andrews as a 6th round pick. So there's a big gap between tight ends there. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I have TJ Hawkinson from Detroit as my tight end 5.
So that'll move us into maybe some, based on the draft, but also just based on stuff that hasn't happened yet. We're going to talk about a couple of guys who rised in the rankings, stuff that might have fallen in the rankings. First one I definitely noticed that stood out for you, Joe. Myles Gaskin, running back from Miami. You have him, I believe, number 43, and he is significantly lower for the rest of your writers. So why do you have Gaskin so high? Is it due to just the potential volume that he could get?
Well, I have Myles Gaskin. Gaskin ranked at RB 43. And as a matter of fact, I need to adjust these because I actually like Mike Davis a little bit more. And I have him at RB 24. But let's put those 2 guys together first and foremost. These were 2 teams that I thought were absolutely in contention to draft a running back early. Everybody on planet Earth wanted Miami to draft Javonte Williams, so we could just say, RB, he's like RB 19. That's it. Miami seems to be a true believer in the running backs don't matter discourse. You know, Myles Gaskin was I think a 7th round pick. Salvon Ahmed, I think, was undrafted. They have these guys who they trust above everything else. They wanted to build build the receivers and get the quarterback and the offensive line and all that. I just look at this as a volume opportunity. And Mike Davis was another winner of the draft. He's in Arthur Smith's offense. I don't expect him to run for 2,000 yards like Derrick Henry, but Atlanta did not draft a running back. They signed a couple of interesting UDFAs, including Javian Hawkins out of Louisville, but Mike Davis is far and away the lead back in Atlanta. And as we saw last year, when he was filling in for Christian McCaffrey for some time, this guy could produce fantasy numbers. So I like that spot for Mike Davis.
Another running back I noticed maybe a couple ticks higher than most of your other writers was Miles Sanders. You have a number 20 overall, above the likes of like Joe Mixon and
not anymore.
Oh, not anymore. Okay. Well, is that potentially due to a running back that we talked about earlier, or?
Well, for a couple of reasons. Number one, first and foremost, I really like Miles Sanders. But drafting Kenneth Gainwell, who can catch the ball, signing Kerryon Johnson, who again, nothing special. I'm not using that as a significant knock on Miles Sanders, but signing Kerryon Johnson, he could play on third downs. They just have a lot more depth there than they did just even a week ago. So that's something that you got to look at.
And another guy threw out there as well, maybe Allen Robinson. Obviously, if you had Andy Dalton as the quarterback in comparison to Justin Fields, I would say that he could have significantly jumped up fantasy draft board.
I'm not sure how much he can jump up draft boards, if you don't mind me saying so.
Mm-hmm.
The guy has 200 catches the last 2 seasons with Mitchell Trubisky and Nick Foles at quarterback. Okay, so we talk about him as being quarterback proof. The funniest part about Allen Robinson was he was a 3rd round pick last year. Why was he a 3rd round pick last year? Well, we know he produces, but his quarterbacks stink. He's a 3rd round pick again after catching 102 passes with bad quarterbacks. So regardless of what you think about Justin Fields, whether you think he's bad, whether you think he's going to be good, I think the only negative would be the Bears probably run the ball a little bit more if Justin Fields is the quarterback. But Allen Robinson's a guy who I'm ranking similarly, no matter who the quarterback is. He had a 100 catch season last year, and he's a 3rd round pick. You're drafting him like he's an 80 catch guy. So there's value there in Allen Robinson. I don't think he moved up or down, but I mean, he was just a guy who I was drafting in the 3rd round, and I'm sleeping like a baby when I do it because I know it's a sound decision. He's proven that time and time again.
Now, obviously, with Emmanuel Sanders leaving New Orleans, there's an open spot there for a number 2 receiver. Is Traquan Smith going to grab? Obviously, this will go without saying. We talked about if it's Hill or if it's Winston. Obviously, these receivers are going to mean more, you would think, if Winston's there. But the number 2 receiver is open. Can Traquan Smith take that, or is that kind of up in the air too?
Well, I think it's up in the air. Traquan Smith's the guy who has the draft capital there. He was a 3rd round pick 3 years ago. But a guy I know for a fact that they really like is somebody who came on as an undrafted free agent last year. His name is Marquez Callaway. He was an undrafted free agent out of Tennessee, and I think they really like what he's able to do. They have Deontay Harris there, who's I believe a 3rd round player who's been kind of a return specialist. That is one where I think you're at the end of your draft, you're going to throw one of these darts and hope it lands on the right guy, whether it's Marquez Callaway, whether it's Traquan Smith. But I expect the targets here are going to be dominated by Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, obviously, and Adam Troutman, the tight end. Remember, Josh Hill isn't there anymore. Jared Cook's not there anymore. So Troutman's a guy who's very interesting for the future.
Now, in terms of, we talked about a couple of these guys, so we can real briefly talk about them. Some fallers because of the draft. Obviously, you look at Melvin Gordon, you look at James Robinson. How do you look at them headed into the season? Are you more intrigued with the rookies coming in than those 2 dropping down, you would say?
I'm more interested in Gordon from a fantasy perspective because I think he can catch the ball. James Robinson had an absolutely incredible rookie season, and they just completely nuked it. They signed Carlos Hyde, who Urban Meyer's going to force on there even if he stinks. And they drafted ETN. And I think ETN's going to lead this team in targets out of the backfield. So that's a big nuke to the fantasy value of James Robinson. Gordon, I think, is at least going to catch passes. So from his perspective, I'm a little more interested in fantasy, even though I rank Javonte Williams higher than Gordon. They are a lot closer in my rankings than James Robinson is to Travis Etienne.
And then going to New York for the Giants. I mean, I bumped down Sterling Shepard. Obviously, Kenny Golladay is there now. Hurt most of last year. Tony was drafted. How do we think that receiving core kind of lines up? It could definitely depend on Daniel Jones, obviously.
It's a nightmare for fantasy because the question is, how good is Daniel Jones? And when it comes to like Golladay, where I'm drafting Golladay, there's just guys around there who I'm just more interested in. Deontay Johnson and Brandon Ayuk are more interesting than Golladay to me. Mike Davis is more interesting than Golladay to me. CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase are more interesting than Golladay to me. Even if, like, you look at having this guy, like, at some point you have to rank him higher. You have to rank him higher only because, like, you can't justify dropping him to like 90 overall. But like, you're like, man, I'd rather wait 10 picks and take DJ Chark than taking Golladay because I'm just not sure how good Daniel Jones is. And then you got Sterling Shepard, you have Evan Ingram, you have Barkley out of the backfield. I don't know how the hell they're going to use Kadarius Toney. Darius Slayton's still there. It's a nightmare of a receiving core for me. And I'm probably more likely, quite frankly, to have shares in Daniel Jones than I am in any one of these receivers. More so, I'll probably be going down the board to like Shepard and just seeing if he hits as opposed to spending up for Kenny Golladay.
So, Joe, we'll finish it off here with a couple of questions, maybe just to let us know how you're kind of looking to draft this year. You kind of hinted on it. It sounds like you don't normally take quarterbacks too early. Mm-hmm. What's your QB strategy this year in terms of a PPR league? And then maybe what's your strategy if you're in maybe a 2 QB league?
So 2 QB completely changes everything, by the way.
Yeah.
Like, I'm looking quarterback as soon as first round in the 2 QB league. So that's just that's a completely different strategy. But if I'm talking about a league where, like, what most people are going to do, there's still a visceral reaction from me when I draft a quarterback in like the 5th round. I recoil. I'm like, oh, I can't believe I just did that. But it's more viable this year. And when you have these running quarterbacks, Kyler Murray, you've got Lamar Jackson, you have Josh Allen. Obviously, Mahomes can run a little bit. Wilson, although that he's another guy who's like, what's the situation there? But all these Hurts, all these guys who can run, you have to go a little bit earlier to draft these guys. And I always looked at drafting quarterbacks as like the old pornography adage. It when you see it. Like, when you see your draft board and you're like, I really, my number one receiver on here, not to pick on Kenny Golladay, is like, my number one receiver on my board is Kenny Golladay, and my number one running back is Myles Gaskin, and but Lamar Jackson's there, and like, you just internally you can't justify taking Myles Gaskin over Lamar Jackson. That's kind of the way I look at it. So I'll be willing to go a little bit earlier this year, but the one thing I'm definitely looking to do, rounds 2, 3, and 4 are just primo wide receiver rounds. There are so many good receivers available in those rounds. I think a lot of teams I'm going to draft this year are going to have a running back in the first round and then like receiver, because there are so many good receivers. Like, I just did a draft yesterday where I drafted Christian McCaffrey number 1 overall. And I ended up in the next 3 rounds with A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, and Robert Woods. And
wow.
I'm like, that's incredible. So that's great value, in my opinion.
So you really answered my next question there. I was asking first 2 rounds, where are you looking? And because you have the people who will say grab your 2 running backs early. Mm-hmm. You have the people who
and
will
that's
say
viable,
grab
by
your 2
the way.
receivers, but
I tried to receive a running back. Like last year, I got Metcalf and Derrick Henry, and I was like, oh wow,
you can do
there.
either or. Two running backs is viable. Like the second round running backs this year. Najee Harris is a second round running back for now. Austin Eckler, Miles Sanders, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, you might be able to draft in the second round. You're looking at DeAndre Swift, Cam Akers. There are some really good second round running backs. So if you're at the back end of that first round and you're like, man, I really kind of want to draft Jonathan Taylor and Austin Eckler, you're still going to have good receivers in the third and fourth round. So the fact of the matter is, I think the second round is super deep this year. It's a really good round.
And in terms of positions, is receiver not? I know it is, but is receiver not very deep? So you want to grab a couple good ones early, or is it running back that you need to get one, or you're going to kind of be in trouble really quick? That happens year to year, it kind of changes. But
yeah, like last year was what it was called a good year for zero RB. There's a militant, not militant's the wrong word, but there's a good subsect of fantasy Twitter that is willing to figure out the running back position later, willing to draft late round running backs, thinking there's going to be injuries, there's going to be guys who catch passes, so I can draft those guys and figure out, the running back position elsewhere. I just think the high end receivers this year, there's a lot more of them than the high end running backs. And sometimes that works both ways. Sometimes you look at it, well, I better get my high end running backs because I can get the receivers later, or I'm just going to load up at wide receiver, let them carry my team, and I'll figure out running back position. I think both of those strategies are viable.
And last but not least, Joe, you've kind of been hitting on it, but do we have any general advice for fantasy football goers this year that they should probably live by heading into their drafts?
General advice that you should live by heading into your draft. The one thing I would say is, if you don't draft an early tight end, probably should wait and get a couple of those players later. Travis Kelce is a very viable first round pick, by the way. He was like, we have a new stat coming up on the site that's called Fantasy War, wins above replacement, and it basically said he was like the most valuable player by far because of what he created over a replacement tight end. So he's viable. So I think that's a valid strategy. Be prepared to pay a little bit more for your quarterback this year than you have in years past, only because of all these rushing quarterbacks that are available, and running back thins out. You're gonna have to hold your nose and a little bit later. I haven't done a ton of drafts yet, but running back really does thin out. So that's something that you should be paying attention to. But overall, I think it's going to be a much more fun season because we're going to have an off season, and that's going to make it more enjoyable.
Yeah, I know in previous seasons, you've heard a lot of analysts say, well, if you're not the first guy to draft a tight end, be the last. Or sometimes in QB, one QB leagues, if you're not in the first three, wait until mid rounds to grab some. So very interesting there. But Joe, we appreciate you coming on. Your fantasy knowledge is unprecedented. So it was great to have you here, and we appreciate you coming on.
I appreciate you guys having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Really, really do appreciate having some time for us today. And next time you're on, you're gonna talk some baseball with us.
Okay. All right, guys. Have a good one.
Talk soon, man.
But as always, everyone, if you're new to the channel, we appreciate you following us. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Time Out with Derek and Joe. We're on all podcast platforms, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. We're out there. Our Facebook group, Time Out with Derek and Joe. And you can always email us any questions, timeoutderekandjoe@gmail.com. As always, everyone, thank you for taking time out of your day to spend some time with us. Stay safe and take care.